Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the IAIR podcast series Culture in Conversation. My name is Chan-Hoong, and today it's my privilege to have Deborah Tai, Professor of Communication and Acting Dean of Liu Klein College of Media and Communication, Temple University, to come to our show. Deborah, how are you today?
Doing well. It's so good to see you.
Yes, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming to our show. For the benefit of those who are not familiar with Deborah, she is a distinguished scholar on intercultural communication, negotiation, and conflict management. And for today's podcast, we'd like to have Deborah to share with us about some of her perspective about cultural conflict. And perhaps let me first start off, Deborah, by asking, if you may, how do we think about culture? When we think about culture, very often, if you talk to laymen, they often think about ethnicity, nationality, religion, and values. So, in your opinion, what will be some of the most important and influential identity marker, if you like, when we think about culture that shapes the way we think and the way we feel? Deborah.
For me, because I study communication, so much of it is the channels of communication. I think visually, that's one of the biggest markers is what we see in front of us and the reflexes that creates in our mind of associations or experiences or lack of experiences with people who don't look like us. I grew up in a place that was all blonde hair, blue eyed people. And, and then when I went to China many years later, where everybody had black hair and it was very different for me and felt very foreign because I wasn't used to being surrounded by people who weren't blonde hair and blue eyed. So
Mm,
I think the visual markers, especially because visual markers can also be um, they can signify religion, depending on, dress or a kippah or a burqa or certainly the skin color. We also know that right now the identification of people who don't look like the country expects in the United States, how people expect somebody to look as American. It was as difficult as that is to watch, it's the visual markers that are
mm,
the first thing that people jump to.
mm. So people are reacting to the visual markers, but what exactly or why exactly are those markers creating the misunderstanding, if I may, and why are they so influential, that even lead to conflicts and people getting into disagreement and misunderstandings as a result of those markers.
Lack of experience, number one. Lack of having a breadth of experience of being able to know that somebody who doesn't look like me is still has norms that are acceptable for them, and those are that I need to learn what those norms are. So the visual, it could be tone of voice and what we hear, tone of voice, volume, speech rate, whether I speak louder or if I
Mm,
speak softer or slower or speak
mm,
very quickly. Those kinds of markers that can create misunderstanding or identify something as foreign. But there's so much history that where we can see how the way people look
mm,
um, is something that if a culture of people, if people feel threatened, if they feel their resources are being taken away by somebody, the visual markers are what they go after first to identify
mm,
people who don't fit in somebody's expectations of who belongs or who doesn't belong. And so it creates a lot of conflict for
mm,
people who are not either not willing to go beyond what they see or are or just want to control and have power.
So clearly, all these visual markers kind of give a certain impression. And for some communities, that might be interpreted as a threat, that they are here, they're going to take away jobs or, going to erode some of the practices, the way of life. But it's interesting to hear from you because, much as the visual markers, affects the way you think about the other individual, the othering, right? The fact is that we live in a very globalized world today, and it's very interconnected. Air travel is so often and so common. I come from Singapore, to North America. It's only about what 18 hours of flight, and we can all do all
That's all.
this. That's all. Yes, and you can do all this via internet today, right? Like we're having this conversation now.
Yeah.
So why, in spite of all of that, we have not learned to live with communities from diverse background. The fact is that we are living in that, very compact environment. We are able to meet one another. So yes, I mean those visual markers may be, influential. They give us some hints about who you are, but why are we not able to learn, and be aware of what those markers means, in today's
Oh,
context? What are your thoughts on that?
oh, I wish we would, but it takes a lot of work. You have to be willing to put yourself out there to get to know people who don't look like you, who don't sound like you, who don't act like you. And that a lot of people are not comfortable with that. Some of the most ethnocentric people I've ever met are people who have traveled a lot and they've gone to different cultures for short periods of time. They look at the very surface of the culture and then they go, yeah, my culture's better. And they come home, or they go for a short period of time and they give up on the culture and they can't stand it. And as we know, you know, millions of dollars are spent by companies bringing expats back home because they can't thrive in a new culture, but they stay surrounded by people they're comfortable with instead of getting out and learning what the culture is about. There's a great quote that from a book years ago, and it's talking about Chinese culture. It says, if you've been in
Mm.
China for a week, you can write a book. If you've been there a month, you can write a short article. If you've been there a year, you can write nothing. Because the
That's
longer,
kind of ironic, almost like a paradox, isn't it? The longer you stay, the more aware, I mean, of your limitations. Whereas the shorter you live, you tend to predict, assume that you can write, you are able to articulate and criticize. I don't know. Is that how you look at it?
yeah, that if you're there just a short time, it's like, oh, the culture is this way, it's that way. This is how
Mm.
people act. This is what they do, and you have no real depth of what people in the culture actually do and how they behave or how they think. So it's very easy to be superficial. The deeper you get into the culture, the more you learn that every culture is very complex. It's very deep. Relationships operate in very different ways and at multiple levels with different types of people, and that there are good people and bad people in every culture. They're not all like, oh, they're really great. They're, there's a lot of complexity.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. I mean, speaking of which, we talk about the depth of the knowledge, and the temporal dimension. If you're there for a short period, that kind of contact may not actually, add benefit to understanding. And that kind of reminded me of the work by the American political scientist Samuel Huntington, and his book about the clash of civilizations. And as you may remember, he said that, cultural, particularly religion differences, conflicts, are inevitable in kind of the post-Cold War climate, particularly the West, and the Islamic environment and the Islamic universe. They said that these are incompatible. And, I read his work, and, one of the things that I could never quite understand, um, and that's the assumption of homogeneity, which is not just about the homogeneity of the other group, but also the homogeneity of your own group. So if the two groups, the so-called the West, the Western civilization and the Islamic civilization are as homogeneous as we assume to be, why do we often look at two communities as being at odds with one another? Why do we often assume that they are incompatible?
Mm. Well, as soon as we get into religion, it gets very, very difficult because there are people who own a religion or are adherers to a religion. And in every religion, we see there are people who want power, who feel their religion is threatened, who want to fight against any other group that might threaten the values and the religion that I have, that that your religion isn't compatible. But it's one, I would hate to say any religion is not compatible with other living beings, right? I think it's usually our own misunderstanding. If we take the West and define that, if we're talking about religion, if we talk about Christianity, if we talk about Catholicism and Protestantism as the religion that's predominant in the West, the religion and the belief of biblical teaching is very different than the extremist views of Christian nationalists who want the in the United States want Christianity to be the national religion and want to take control. That's people who want control. It's people who want power. It's not that Christianity is incompatible with Islam or Islam the other way. It's the extremists who use religion and use bits and pieces, cherry pick pieces to represent their values and then promote those that create the conflict. That's not compatible.
Mm, mm. You, Deborah, as an expert on intercultural communication, what would you say are the key principles in negotiation and conflict resolution? I mean, are we falling short in any of those? After so many years of research and after so much cultural contact and experiences, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's so hard right now to watch negotiation principles being thrown around that are so poorly conceived when what we know, I mean, we can just go back to Fisher and Urey's Getting to Yes, the classic book on negotiation. It's small, it's practical, but they define a wise agreement as one that's durable, one that meets the interests of both sides to the best extent possible. One that takes into account community concerns, that those who aren't in the center to the agreement but are affected by the agreement that two parties reach are taken into consideration. And the last one is that the last principle of a wise agreement is that by the end of the negotiation, the relationship is better or at least not worse than when you started the negotiation. So if we take those principles of what a good negotiation is, there's a lot of failure of negotiating. I'm going to push my values on you. I'm going to push my way of life. I have the power. I'm going to make you do what I want and then call it a negotiation. That has nothing to do with what people who actually know something about negotiation would ever say is a good approach to negotiating because it destroys relationships.
So it's not so much the both parties having a different social construction of negotiation, but more about one or both parties want to enforce or impose what would they consider to be the term of their engagement. Is that what you're saying?
Well, at least one side needs to do that. It may be that you're negotiating with another side that doesn't know the principles of negotiation. Still, a good negotiator approaches the negotiation with those principles in mind of how are we going to reach agreements that are going to further our relationship, help us build something that is constructive long term, not something that's going to fall apart in a year because it really was built on a foundation that just crumbles.
Mm. And in speaking about negotiation and communication, a lot of our so-called engagement today is all done through social media. Like what we're doing now, through the internet, virtually. And as you can imagine, this whole culture of social media, it's actually quite, I would say, something recent. Well, depending on how you define recent, right? I mean, this is not something that we familiar that is so obvious, so evident 15 years, 20 years ago. But I think the point is that, with the rise of social media and there's this concept, this view that these platforms of engagement, whether it's on, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and these platforms are said to have contributed to more diversions and polarizations because people go to the platforms, they air their views, and they just rebel and throw out whatever that they think that they feel. So and it's often said that these platforms, the social media platforms, contributed to more division and polarization. So what are your views on that? Do you agree with that? I mean, what would be your take? Is social media a major culprit, right, in promoting hatred and tensions in the cultural tensions? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, we could have another podcast just on algorithms, right? And
Algorithms.
yeah, and as soon as you and there've been some fascinating studies, as soon as you put in a political view, that all of a sudden you get flooding of views that are similar or more and more extreme in the direction that you expressed a view or looked at social media in a political direction. It's taking you down a whole rabbit hole of attitudes and values and hatred and anger and and the outrage. It just feeds on outrage. And so to if we're looking again at negotiation, if negotiation is building trust and building relationships, trusted relationships, so that even if we're in absolutely opposing views, we can try to find a path forward together, then living in that kind of outrage is so detrimental to any possible moving forward together, and it just pushes us away. And so we have to be really careful how we use social media um and be very careful about engaging in those kinds of discussions or that kind of vitriol about the other side. As soon as it starts calling the other side names, it's trying to influence you to hatred, and hatred is never going to get us forward.
So your point is a big part of that has to do with the algorithm, the way opinions are being sorted out, the way opinions are being distributed in the cyberspace, that kind of lead us to this rabbit hole, an echo chamber. Is that your take on that?
Oh, very much so. And it's one of the things I love about the National Academy of Intercultural Research is that you have people who are studying intercultural research subjects. I think people who really study intercultural things are people who want to get along, who really are seeking to how do we get along? How do we work together? How can we bridge those differences that we come together? And more so find richness in those differences because it expands how we see the world and how we understand it and how we interact with others and makes us kinder. And so it's filled with a lot of kind people, right?
Kind people like you and I.
That's right. I hope so.
Thank you, Deborah. I think those are very, very interesting insights, and I'm pretty sure the audience will find the sharing very useful. And certainly, as you correctly pointed out, there's so much to unpack, and there's so much assumptions, the human being, the mind, the way we interpret visual cues, and the kind of tribal identity markers that shape the way we engage one another. Indeed, those are very important topics, today, for all of us to understand and to study. Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate having you on board here, and look forward to having you again in our future podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.